Hey, welcome to Ask Ron, and I have one question to answer today from a gentleman named Bill 2 on the forum. Thank you, Bill, for coming up with a good question for me. Ron, in your experience, what amount of AAS, anabolic androgenic steroids, would someone need to build an impressive body, not a mass monster, but a good, respectable physique with health as top priority? What amount you wouldn't go over, and what kind of AAS do you feel meet those above criteria? Of course, I have to start with a tremendous disclaimer because I am not a steroid expert. I bow down and defer to many, many other people who are much more knowledgeable about the subject than I am. I do know a little bit about it from my own experience, from knowing and speaking with so many other users over the years, people I know have known very, very well. And, we confide in each other. There's, it's a little brotherhood of people who use gear that we only talk about it with each other. That being said, I'm not an expert, but here's what I will say. First of all, to build an impressive body, let's just take genetics out of the equation because you're only going to build whatever physique you were meant to build genetically. What Lee Haney always talks about is your genetic blueprint. Some people have really nice structure, nice muscle shape, someone like that, and they respond very well to training. Somebody like that is going to look pretty good without steroids. I've known plenty of people over the years who naturally were able to build physiques that many others who used plenty of steroids couldn't build just because they didn't have the genetics. And it's not fair. No, it's not. It's not fair that some guys are 5'1" and other guys are 7 feet tall. It's just we all have to deal with what our Creator gave us, or our parents, and the DNA that was passed on to us. So, what amount of steroids would somebody need to build an impressive body? Another factor, there's so many factors here we got to talk about. We talk about genetics, and there's another type of genetics, and that's drug response. The pros and some other people, it's not a lot of people, not a big percentage of people that use steroids are tremendous responders to steroids. They will respond much, much better to the same amount of steroids as another person. So person A could take 1,000 milligrams total of steroids and blow up, put on, let's say, 20 pounds of quality muscle in a year. That's a lot. It really is. Whereas person B could take the same amount of steroids, same amount of time, train just as hard, eat just as well, get plenty of rest, and put on maybe 5 pounds of muscle. It's another factor. It's a whole other factor. So the people that have the best physiques, they have the best genetics in terms of bone structure, muscle insertions, muscle shapes, all that, the physical things that they were born with. Then they have another component, is that they respond much, much better to steroids. They grow so much better than regular people do. Why? I'm sure there's a reason. I'm sure that it's got something to do with receptors, something. But I don't know why, but I've observed it so many times over the years. I know for a fact that this is a very real phenomenon, that some people they respond better to drugs. So somebody like that is obviously not going to need the same quantity. And a lot of times when some pros have been very open about what they used and given their doses, and they've gotten heat for it. They've gotten shit on because people say, he's such a liar, he's so full of shit. Why'd he say that's all he used? We all know he was on 5 times more, 10 times. There's no way he could be that big or look that good on just that amount. Why? Well, you couldn't, but he can. I'm not saying that some guys don't lie or haven't lied. I'm sure not everyone's been truthful about it. But I'm sure there are many cases where guys have been completely honest about how much they've used, and they get called liars because it's so hard to comprehend for most people. And unless you've seen it yourself firsthand, and for a fact, you've known people, I've used this example in the past. In the 90s in California, I didn't start using gear till almost toward the end of the 90s, but people at my gym, there was only a couple dealers that everybody bought. It was Pasadena, California. Everybody bought their stuff from the same couple guys. So a lot of times we would go in on stuff together. We would pitch in and let's get, because we could get a discount if we bought X amount of bottles or whatever. So I knew what this guy was getting. He knew what I was getting. We all knew because we were all buying together. We'd get it all in one large quantity and, divvy it out like mail call in an army movie or something. So we would know that this guy's on that much, this guy's on that much, and we would watch each other over the coming weeks and months. And some people just blew up. Some people responded better than others. It's not fair. It's kind of mysterious. Even though, as I say, there's probably a very scientific explanation to it. I don't know what it is. But some people respond better. I'm going to answer the question, don't worry. A final factor you have to consider is that the vast majority of you out there using steroids, you have no idea what doses you're actually using. Because we're all using underground crap these days. Unless you're somehow lucky enough, have a connection to get pure pharmaceutical stuff, from CVS or Walgreens, something like that. You're getting a bottle of cypionate that the people who are on TRT get prescribed to them. That's when you know you're getting 200 milligrams per milliliter in that bottle of 10 milliliters, okay? Everybody else, you're buying this shit. It says, oh, it's 400, it's 350, it's 275. You know what? You don't know. I don't know how much is in there. Bill Llewellyn sells a steroid testing kit, but that only tells you what the steroid is. It doesn't tell you how much. So, yeah, it'll say, this is definitely testosterone enanthate, this is definitely trembolone, this is definitely nandrolone, but is it 300 milligrams per milliliter like it says on the bottle, or is it 50 milligrams per milliliter? You're saying, why would there be such a difference? Why wouldn't the stuff all be what it says on the bottle? Because people are greedy. Underground drug manufacturers, some of them are on the up and up, and they want to make a quality product. So they'll give you they'll make sure that what's on the dosage that's on the bottle is what you're getting. A lot of others, they will maybe do that for the first batch, and then you'll think, okay, I'm just making up a name here. Hercules pharmaceutical stuff. That's awesome. I used it, and it was really strong, and I blew up. I put on X amount of pounds. So everyone goes, okay, Hercules, that's a good brand. They'll buy it and then the guy who makes Hercules, he knows that first batch was strong, but now he's got everyone hooked. So he can, for a few more months, he can sell 1/3 of that amount in his bottles, and people still keep buying it until eventually people catch on and go, wait a minute, this Hercules brand is crap. So he shuts down the Hercules. He just gets some new labels. Now it's called Adonis Laboratories or something. Puts a different bottle, and he does it all over again. He starts out with a full strength product, and over the coming months it gets weaker and weaker until everyone catches on, and then he does it. It's a cat and mouse game. And what are you going to do? You're going to complain to the Better Business Bureau? You're going to take it back to Walgreens, get your money back? No, you're screwed, because you got bunk gear, as we say. So that's a huge problem when you're trying to talk about how much should you use, because you really don't know exactly how much you're using. So I'm going to just assume that you know how much you're getting, okay? That's a huge assumption to make, but I have to make it for the sake of answering this question. Okay, what amount would someone need to build an impressive physique to put on? So let's say you don't want to be a mass monster. Let's take an average guy. Let's say your average height, 5'9", 5'10". You've trained naturally for a few years at least. Let's say you're 190 pounds, 200 pounds, somewhere in that range, and you're stuck there. That's your natural limit for you. And you'd like to be something like 220, with abs. Have that bigger, rounder look that you're not ever going to have naturally, but you can get that with some pharmaceutical help. So the first couple times you use steroids, you're not going to need much at all. I don't think you would need more than, let's say, 400 or 500 milligrams of any type of test, cypionate, enanthate, sustanon, a week, and you would actually do fine on that, just that for your first cycle, believe it or not, because it'd be brand new to your body. Your body's like, oh wow, what is this? I'm getting all this testosterone that I never had before. So the first cycle you do, 400 or 500 milligrams of test for, say, 16 weeks. And I'm not going to get into all the ancillary agents. I'm not an expert, as I said, so I'm not going to tell you how to use and what you should take with it, because That's not my wheelhouse. So you would do pretty well on that. So if you start out at 190, 16 weeks of a cycle like that, it's safe to say you're going to get up to 210 or so, 215. Some of that's going to be water for sure. A little bit of that's going to be fat. You'll probably put on a good permanent 5 to 7 pounds of muscle. That's 5 to 7 pounds of muscle you didn't have before, but now you have it for the rest of your life, as long as you keep training hard. Like I said, you're going to make gains on cycles, and you're going to lose part of the gains, but you're always going to keep a portion of the gains. And you talk about these weight increases. 5 pounds doesn't sound like much to some of you. I think it was Mike Menzer who first made this example. He said, for those of you who don't think 5 pounds of muscle is a lot, go check out the deli, the meat section of your local supermarket or Costco or whatever. There was no Costco back then. Put 5 pounds of steak in front of you, or 5 pounds of chicken thighs. That's a lot of meat. Now imagine slapping all that pure muscle onto your body. It's a big difference. And if you do cycle after cycle after cycle, and let's say every cycle you add in a permanent 3 to 5 pounds, it doesn't sound like much. I know it doesn't. But if you could do that for 10 consecutive cycles, that's 30 to 50 pounds of muscle. That is a lot of muscle. So anyway, let's back up. How much would you need? So your first cycle, you'd probably do very well on just test. Okay. Second cycle, you could probably still make some decent gains out of test, but maybe now you'll introduce something that's a little more anabolic. DECA is number one choice. Test and DECA are like peanut butter and jelly. If you can't make good gains on good old-fashioned test and DECA like they did going back to the days of Arnold and Franco, then this probably isn't for you, because if you're going to have to use crazy amounts and all these other weird drugs to make gains, you're definitely going to be compromising your health. And I'm not saying that what I'm telling you to do or what I'm talking about here is 100% healthy. Of course it's not. Anytime you're putting foreign chemicals into your body and shutting down your own natural production, this is something that the doctor, anabolic doc Thomas O'Connor, would be much more qualified to. And he talks about this a lot. Anytime you're doing that, there's some risk. Obviously, there's going to be. So, but minimal risk, this is what I'm talking about. The cycles I'm talking about, I feel personally, are minimal risk. That being said, some of you guys have congenital, genetic problems. You have heart disease runs in your family. Maybe you have liver disease running in your family, kidney disease. Some of you guys, you need to really stay on top of all your blood work and all kinds of medical checkups, because you might be the unlucky one who, your buddy uses steroids for 10 years, blasts all kinds, and nothing happens to him. You, 5 years, and you have, a heart attack, or you have, your kidneys start shutting down on you. It's an individual thing, just like the drug response itself. Some people are very lucky. They're never going to have any major health problems. Other people are going to have major health problems. And unless you stay on top of it with your blood work and getting things like the coronary artery calcium score, things like that, you won't know what's going on. So if you're going to use steroids, you really need to stay on top of your medical situation. That is your responsibility, no one else's. Okay, so your next cycle after that, again, something like 500 milligrams of test a week, and I would break that up into at least 2 injections. You don't want these crazy spikes and lows. So like say a Monday and a Thursday, you can do your shots. So test, and then just throw in something like a DECA. How much? Again, first time using it, 400 or 500 milligrams a week would be fine. So now you're at 800 to 1,000 milligrams total. That's substantial. It doesn't sound like much compared to what you hear about guys using. Guys today use a lot more. Absolutely they do. Does that mean they need to, or does that mean that they wouldn't get results? Somebody that's been using steroids for a long time, that probably wouldn't do much, if anything, for them, because their body's, it's regulated to it. It's accustomed to that amount. It's a situation I think you run into with just about any drug. Over time, your body, you build up a tolerance, and you're going to need a little bit more and more to achieve the same effect. I'm sure recreational drug users are very, very familiar with this situation. So a cycle like that, 400 or 500 milligrams each of test and a DECA, or you could use an equipoise, something like that. One of those two combined together, and something that's a little more anabolic and androgenic together, you do pretty well on that. You put on enough size to make a big difference with your physique. And you said you didn't want to be a mass monster, so there's no need for you to throw in the insulin, the GH, and the harsher things like trenbolone that are really going to be taking a toll on your health if you're not careful and if you're unlucky especially. Test is something that the body, it's one of the safer ones only because your body makes it naturally anyway. You're taking much larger amounts than what your body makes. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's 100% safe. Steroid use is never going to be 100% safe. I do believe you can minimize it. But you also need to think about taking a lot of downtime between cycles. You can't be on all the time. And I think that's probably one of the tougher things for users to deal with. A lot of guys say they're just going to do them one time to make some gains and that's it. They want to see what it's all about. I can't recall, I've talked to so many people, known so many people, I don't know anyone who's ever done one cycle of steroids. It's like eating one potato chip. Once you have that feeling, the visual sensation, you look in the mirror and you see yourself bigger and fuller, you're stronger, you're getting better pumps in the gym, you have more sex drive, you have this feeling of well-being, and then you go off steroids. Even if you're using PCT, you're still going to be losing that. You're going to lose that fullness. Your libido goes down. You're not going to have that same amount of energy and that sense of well-being. It's a bummer. So that's why steroids are more psychologically addicting than anything else. Because once you have that feeling of being on them, you hate not being on them. So it's tough. It's very tough to be 16 weeks on and then someone says, okay, you should take 16 weeks off between cycles. A lot of people never make it. They either get right back on them after a couple weeks once they notice that they're looking smaller and softer and they don't have that hardness with the veins and they're not getting those crazy pumps and their strength is going down. And it's something you really need to know going in, is that once you start using steroids, you're probably going to want to be on them forever. And you shouldn't be on them forever, except if you have a legitimate medical need and you're taking a TRT dose every week. So what most people do, steroid users, especially if they've been doing them for a while, is they'll do these blasts, 16 or 20 week cycles, whatever, and then cruises where they're only on, theoretically they should only be on a TRT dose. Something like 200 milligrams, 250 milligrams a week a test. The types of steroids, like I said, the injectable ones, they're going to take longer to kick in. I'll talk about orals for a second. It's very common to kickstart cycles with an oral, like a Dianabol or an Anadrol, because a lot of guys want to feel something and see something right away. Whereas if you're injecting these long-acting testers like a Testipionate or a Nanthate, a Deca, you're injecting them and you're not really going to see or feel anything for at least a couple weeks. I say 2 weeks when you start noticing, and 3 weeks before you start really feeling everything's kicked in, so to say. Which also means if you stop injecting 16 weeks cycle, that 16 weeks, you're still really on for a good, almost a month after that. Especially when you realize that these drugs all have a half-life and they're built up in your system and they take a long time to clear. That's why you can still fail a drug test, a good month or two. Actually with Deca, people have failed drug tests from using Deca almost a year later. The metabolites remain in the system that long. You're not seeing the benefits of them anymore, but there's still trace metabolites in your system that long after ceasing the use of something that long acting like a nandrolone, decanoate. So, what amount? I wouldn't go over. I personally, myself, if I was competing, which that's not what we're talking about. If I was competing, my upper limit for me personally would be somewhere between 2 and 3 grams a week of everything combined. But when you're competing, that's when you're taking these things that are not very safe. You're taking the Trenbolone, your Masteron, more exotic things like the Primabol and the Winstrol, Anavar tabs maybe. It's way more expensive and you're on way more drugs when you're in prep mode. Off season, I'm always on TRT. But if I was to use more at certain times of the year, I wouldn't go over, let's say, about 1,200 milligrams a week. So that would be something like 600 or 700 milligrams of test a week. I'm pretty bad at math. 500 or 600, 700 at the most, DECA or EQ, something like those two combined. And like I said, if you can't grow on that, if you need to throw in everything else just to make any gains, you really need to think about this, because you're probably going to be putting your health at risk. You're going to be if you're taking all kinds of different things and harsher things, and you're always on orals and you're always on insulin and you're using Tren, several times a year. You're not going to be a healthy person. And if someone who really values your health and longevity, you wouldn't do that. If your physique is much more important to you, and if you're a competitor, you'll do what you need to do or you feel you need to do. I'm not going to tell you what to do. Do what you want to do. But if you're asking me for health point of view, I wouldn't personally go over 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams for maybe 3 16-week cycles a year. And that's still not safe. I'm not saying that's 100% safe. It's not. But compared to what a lot of guys out there are doing, that's pretty mild and it's pretty safe. So I hope I answered your question. You can't go wrong with the basics that guys have been doing for about 50 years now. Test and DECA, test and equipoise. Just basic, simple, moderate amounts. Use the least amount you can. I always encourage people to do that. Start out with smaller amounts, see how you respond. And if you respond well, that's great. Because if you start out with heavier amounts, like Palumbo used to always tell people, I hope I'm not misquoting him, but I believe he said, the base of every cycle should be a gram of test. That's a lot of tests, especially if we're talking about an actual gram of test. Not, you're injecting what you're injecting what you think is a gram, but it's actually 250. Because it's weak, crappy gear. But if you start out with large amounts of gear and get great results, you'll never know if you could have gotten great results on half of that or a third of that. But you'll have nowhere to go except up. Now you're going to have to use more and more because, like I said, over time your body gets acclimated to the drugs. It's going to take a little bit more as months and years go by to get results. And generally speaking, the bigger you get, and this is whether you're natural or on drugs, the bigger and stronger you get, the harder it's always going to be to get any bigger and stronger beyond that, because you're always getting closer to your ultimate potential. And we all have one. Not everyone's meant to be. There's a misconception that anyone could be Big Ramy size if they trained long enough and used enough drugs. No. That's his genetic potential. Your genetic potential might be 100 pounds lighter than that. You don't know. Not to crap on anyone's dreams. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just trying to tell you, not everyone has the same potential for size. Even forget about the shape and the structure and all that, because anyone can get bigger, but how big you can get, ultimately, that's in your genetic cards. It's also got to do with your drug response. Some of you will respond fantastically to drugs. Others, you're going to get a little bit of muscle growth, you're going to hold a lot of water, you'll get fat, you'll get gyno, you'll lose your hair, you'll get big boil-like acne, and you're not going to get a lot of muscle. Unfortunately, it's not fair. Life isn't fair. Like I said, some of you are gorgeous, handsome guys, and some of you are ugly as fuck. It's not fair, but this is just, we're all made differently. We all have different DNA and different parents, different ancestors. So yeah, I hope I answered the question properly. It's a subject that I don't consider myself an expert on, but I've been around long enough, and I've had my own experiences and known enough people who've gone through their own experiences to be able to share some of that with you guys. So I hope this was helpful to you. And that is it for this edition of Ask Ron. Thanks for watching.